The ground gave way under my shovel. I saw something white, then a glint of metal. My husband stood frozen, his face like stone. "Please," he whispered, "don't tell anyone. Welcome to Nunny Stories. I am very happy to have you here. Before we move on, please like this video, subscribe to the channel. Now let's get back to my story. It all started 10 years ago when I met David. He was kind, funny, and always knew how to make me laugh. I was a simple girl, working hard in a small flower shop, dreaming of a little house with a garden. David made that dream real. He bought us a cozy house, not too big, but with a big backyard, perfect for planting all the roses I loved. We got married 8 years ago, a small, happy ceremony, just family and close friends. I felt like the luckiest woman alive. David was everything I ever wanted in a husband. He was strong, but gentle, always putting me first. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but we always found our way back to each other. He seemed to have a good relationship with his mother, who lived 3 states away and never talked much about his father. He would just say his father passed away when he was young, and it was a painful memory. I respected that and never pushed. Our life together was good, quiet, and full of love. I cooked, he helped around the house. We spent weekends at the park or working in the garden. I always loved my garden. It was my happy place. I grew all kinds of flowers, but especially roses. Red roses, pink roses, yellow roses, they were my passion. Every spring I would spend hours outside, digging, planting, making sure everything was perfect. David would sometimes join me, digging the bigger holes or just sitting on the porch swing, watching me with a warm smile. He knew how much it meant to me. But 2 years ago, something changed. Not in our love, but in David himself. He became quieter, more distant sometimes. He would stare out into the garden with a strange look in his eyes, a look I couldn't quite understand. It wasn't sadness exactly, more like a deep worry, a hidden fear. I felt heartbroken seeing him like this, but I didn't know how to help him. I tried to be extra loving, to make his favorite meals, to cheer him up, but that distant look never fully left his eyes. He started spending more time alone, sometimes just sitting in the garage, lost in thought. I got scared, thinking maybe he was falling out of love with me, or worse, that he had a secret. But I loved him too much to believe he would ever hurt me. I pushed those dark thoughts away. Then, about 6 months ago, David's mother called. She said she was coming to visit for a few weeks. David seemed a little nervous about it, but he put on a brave face. His mother, Mrs. Peterson, was a sweet lady, always very polite. But I noticed a strange tension between her and David. She would sometimes look at him with a sad, knowing look, and he would quickly change the subject. It made me wonder even more about his past, about his father whom he never spoke about. Mrs. Peterson didn't mention him either, not once. It was like he never existed. This made me angry in a way, like a part of David's life was locked away from me. I was his wife, his partner. Why couldn't he share everything with me? One evening, I overheard Mrs. Peterson talking to David in hushed tones in the kitchen. I didn't mean to listen, but their voices were low and serious. I only caught a few words. "Still buried, no one knows, and your secret." My heart jumped into my throat. What secret? What was buried? My mind raced. Was it money? Some old family shame? I was scared, but also very curious. I wanted to ask David, but I knew he would just brush me off. I decided to wait to observe. The spring came, and with it my urge to transform the garden into a sea of roses. I had a new plan, a special rose garden area in the back, near the old gnarled oak tree that stood at the very edge of our property. It was a spot David rarely went near. He always said the soil was bad there, or it was too shady for flowers. But I thought it was perfect. The oak tree had a nice, old-world feel, and I imagined climbing roses growing up its trunk. I spent days planning, drawing sketches, picking out the best rose bushes from the nursery. David watched me with that same worried look. "Are you sure you want to plant there, honey?" he asked one evening, his voice a little strained. "It's a lot of work." I smiled and told him it was my passion, and I wasn't afraid of hard work. He just sighed and nodded, but his eyes were still full of concern. I started digging about 3 weeks ago. The soil near the oak tree was indeed hard, full of roots. It took me a lot of effort just to break the ground. I bought a new, stronger shovel, and little by little I made progress. David offered to help, but he seemed to always pick areas far away from the oak tree, digging in other parts of the garden. When I asked him to help me near the tree, he would make an excuse, "My back hurts," or "I have a big meeting tomorrow, need to rest." I felt a little annoyed, but I understood. He worked hard. Day after day, I was out there, sometimes for 4 or 5 hours. The sun was warm, the birds were singing. It was hard work, but I loved it. I hummed my favorite songs, imagining the beautiful roses that would soon bloom. I had dug a trench about 2 feet deep, ready for the first row of bushes. I was excited. This was going to be the most beautiful part of our garden. Then, 2 days ago, it happened. I was almost done with the first section of the trench. My shovel hit something hard, not a root, not a rock. It felt different. I dug around it carefully. It was something wrapped in an old, thick canvas bag. My heart began to beat faster. What was this? An old treasure, a forgotten tool? I pulled on the edge of the bag, trying to free it from the dirt. It was heavy and surprisingly long. As I pulled it out, a corner of the canvas ripped. I saw something white. Bone. A human bone. My blood ran cold. I dropped the shovel. It clattered loudly against the earth. I stared at the white object, then at the dirty canvas bag. It was undeniably a bone. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped my chest. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I stumbled backwards, falling onto the grass. My mind reeled. What was happening? Whose bone was this? Was it an animal? No, it was too big, too distinctly human. I looked around frantically. David was at work. I was alone. What should I do? My first instinct was to call the police, but then another thought stopped me. This was our garden. What if it was something bad? What if it brought trouble to David? I knew that was silly, but my mind was spinning. I carefully covered the bone with dirt again, trying to push it out of my sight, out of my mind. I told myself it must be an animal, a very large animal. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I spent the rest of the day in a daze. I tried to act normal when David came home, but I couldn't eat. He noticed. "What's wrong, honey? You look pale." I forced a smile. "Just tired from the garden. You know how hard that soil is." He looked at me for a moment, his eyes searching mine. "Maybe take a break tomorrow," he suggested. "Don't overdo it." I nodded, grateful for the excuse. The next morning, I couldn't sleep. The image of that white bone kept flashing in my mind. I knew I couldn't ignore it. I had to know. I had to find out what it was. I waited until David left for work at 8:00 a.m. Then, with a pounding heart, I grabbed my shovel again. I went back to the oak tree. The sun was shining, but I felt cold. I uncovered the spot. The canvas bag was still there. I took a deep breath, and with shaking hands, I started digging more carefully around it. As I cleared away more dirt, the shape of the bag became clearer. It was long, like a person, and there was more than one bone. A whole skeleton. My stomach churned. This was no animal. This was a human being. My hands froze. Then something glinted inside the bag, something metallic. I reached in, pulling out a small, tarnished silver locket. It was old, but I recognized the design. It was the same locket David always wore when we first met, before he started wearing a simple silver chain instead. He had told me it was a family heirloom. My heart stopped. I opened the locket with a trembling finger. Inside, there were 2 tiny, faded photographs. One was of a young woman, very pretty, with kind eyes, David's mother, I realized, from when she was much younger. The other photo was of a young boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, with a mischievous smile, a young David. This locket was undoubtedly his. Terror washed over me. A skeleton in our garden. David's locket buried with it. What did this mean? Was David involved? No, it couldn't be. My kind, gentle David. It was impossible. But the evidence was right there, staring me in the face. My mind screamed at me to run, to forget I ever saw it. But my heart was breaking. I had to know the truth. I covered the skeleton again, my hands moving on their own, numb. I went back inside, shaking like a leaf. I locked the doors. I sat on the couch, tears streaming down my face. What was I going to do? I loved David more than anything, but this was too much. I couldn't protect him if he had done something so terrible. I thought about calling the police, but how could I betray my husband? And what if I was wrong? What if there was a simple explanation? I waited for David to come home. The hours crawled by. Every shadow, every sound made me jump. When I heard his car pull into the driveway at 5:30 p.m., my heart hammered against my ribs. I tried to compose myself, to wipe away the tears, but my eyes were red and swollen. He walked in, smelling of his cologne and the faint scent of old books from his office. He saw my face immediately. "Honey, what's wrong?" he asked, rushing to me, his brow furrowed with concern. He put his hands on my shoulders, his touch usually comforting, but now it felt like a heavy weight. I couldn't hold it in. "David," I choked out. I was digging in the garden near the oak tree. My voice was barely a whisper. His face went pale. The blood drained from his cheeks. His hands tightened on my shoulders, almost painfully. He didn't say anything, just stared at me, his eyes wide with a fear I had never seen before. I found something, I continued, tears starting to flow again. A skeleton and your locket was with it. The words hung in the air, heavy and dark. David took a step back from me, his hands falling to his sides. His face was a mask of shock and horror. He looked like a ghost. "No," he whispered. "No, you didn't. You couldn't have." His voice was barely audible. "I did, David," I cried. "I saw it. I saw the bones and your locket." I pulled the tarnished silver locket from my pocket, holding it out to him. His eyes fixated on the locket. His body sagged. He looked like all the strength had gone out of him. He reached out slowly, taking the locket from my hand. He opened it, gazing at the faded pictures of his mother and himself as a boy. A single tear rolled down his cheek. He was crying, but silently, without a sound. It was the most heartbreaking thing I had ever seen. "David," I pleaded, "what is this? Who is it? Please tell me. We can fix this, whatever it is." I wanted to believe him, to believe that there was an innocent explanation, but the look on his face told me there wasn't. He shook his head slowly, his eyes still fixed on the locket. I can't," he mumbled. "I can't tell you." My heart shattered. He wouldn't tell me. My husband, my partner, the man I loved, was keeping this terrible secret from me. It meant he was involved. My mind went to the worst places. Did he kill someone? Was he a murderer? The thought made me sick to my stomach. "David," I said, my voice firmer now, tinged with anger and betrayal. "I saw it. I know it's there. I have to call the police. I can't just pretend I didn't find a body in our backyard." His head snapped up. His eyes, usually so warm, were now filled with panic. "No, you can't," he yelled, his voice cracking. "Please, honey, don't. You don't understand." "Then make me understand," I shouted back, my own fear turning into rage. "Who is that person? Why are they in our garden? And why is your locket with them, David?" He just stared at me, his chest heaving. He looked utterly broken. "I can't," he repeated, weaker this time. It's too much." I knew then that I couldn't wait. I couldn't live with this secret, with this fear. I walked over to the phone, my hands shaking. David lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "Please, Martha, no." His grip was tight, desperate. "Let go of me, David." I pulled my arm away. "I have to do this, for both of us, for the truth." I dialed 911. My fingers trembled as I spoke to the operator, telling her I found human remains in my backyard. She asked for my address. I gave it, my voice barely steady. David stood there, watching me, his face a mixture of terror and despair. He didn't try to stop me again. When I hung up, he slowly sank into a chair, his head in his hands. He looked defeated. I called my best friend, Sarah, and asked her to come over. I needed someone. Within 30 minutes, the sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder and louder. Police cars, an ambulance, and even a forensics van pulled up to our house. Our quiet street was suddenly filled with flashing lights and stern-faced officers. Neighbors came out of their houses, staring, whispering. My carefully tended garden, my sanctuary, was now a crime scene. The police cordoned off the area around the oak tree. Detectives, serious and sharp, started asking questions. They spoke to me first, gently, asking me to recount everything I had seen and done. I told them about my passion for gardening, about digging the trench, about hitting the canvas bag, finding the bones, and then the locket. I showed them the locket, still in David's hand. Then they turned to David. He was silent for a long time, just sitting there, head down. The detective, a stern woman named Detective Miller, asked him directly, "Mr. Peterson, do you know anything about these remains?" David slowly raised his head. His eyes were red, but he looked calmer now, strangely resolved. He took a deep breath. "Yes," he said, his voice surprisingly clear. "I do." A ripple went through the room. Detective Miller leaned forward. "And what can you tell us, Mr. Peterson?" David looked at me, his eyes full of pain and regret, but also a strange sense of peace. "It's my father," he said, his voice quiet. "The man buried in our garden is my father." My breath hitched. His father, but he told me his father died when he was young. This was too much. The detectives looked at each other, surprise on their faces. "Your father, Mr. Peterson?" Detective Miller asked, her voice sharp. "And why is your father buried in your backyard, and with your locket?" David closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. He looked directly at me. "Martha," he said, "I need to tell you everything, all of it, it's time." The room fell silent, except for the distant sounds of the police outside. David looked at the detective, then back at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. He took another deep breath, his hands clasped tightly. "My father," he began, his voice hoarse, "was not the man I told you he was, Martha. He didn't just pass away when I was young. He was a monster." My eyes widened. I had never heard him speak like this. Detective Miller nodded for him to continue, her pen ready. "His name was Robert Peterson," David went on, his voice gaining a slow, steady rhythm as if recalling a story he had replayed in his mind 1,000 times. "He was a very big man, strong and very, very angry. All the time. He drank a lot, every night. And when he drank, he changed. He would yell at my mother, scream at her for no reason. He would hit her." My hand flew to my mouth. I gasped. My kind, gentle David had lived through this. "I was a child," David continued, "maybe 7 or 8 years old. I remember everything like it was yesterday. We lived in a small house, just my mother, my father, and me. There was no escaping him. Every night was a new fear. My mother, she was so sweet, so kind, just like you, Martha, but she was terrified of him. She tried to protect me, to hide me, but he always found us. He would hurt her and I would just watch, hiding under the bed, crying silently." Tears streamed down my face. I couldn't imagine. This was not the story I knew. "One night," David said, his voice growing softer, almost a whisper, "it was worse than usual. I was 12 years old then. My mother had tried to leave him that day. She packed a small bag, tried to take me, but he found her. He dragged her back into the house. He was furious. He started hitting her, harder than ever before. She was screaming, crying. I could hear it all from my bedroom. I was so scared. I felt useless, small. I hated him." He paused, swallowing hard. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with his painful memories. "I crept out of my room," David continued, his eyes now fixed on some point beyond us, reliving the moment. "I saw him. He had her against the wall, his hand around her throat. Her face was turning blue. She was choking. He was going to kill her. I knew it. He kept yelling, 'You're not leaving me. You'll never leave.' I saw a heavy old brass lamp on a table nearby. My mind just broke. I couldn't let him kill her." He looked at me then, his eyes full of anguish. "I picked up that lamp, Martha. It was so heavy for a 12-year-old boy. I ran to him. I hit him with it as hard as I could on the back of his head." My blood ran cold. The detectives exchanged a glance, their faces grim. "He fell," David whispered, his voice cracking. "He just fell to the floor next to my mother. He didn't move." My mother gasped for air, pulling away from him. She looked at me, then at him, lying there. Her eyes were wide with shock. "David," she said, "what have you done?" "I was so scared," he recounted. "But my mother, even though she was hurt, she pulled herself together. She checked him. He was dead. She said, 'He's gone. He's really gone.'" She started crying, but there was also relief in her voice. I was just a child. I didn't know what to do. She told me, "We have to hide him. If anyone finds out, they'll take you away. They'll say you murdered your father." I was crying, saying I just wanted to protect her. "We couldn't call the police," David explained, because she was afraid. Afraid they wouldn't believe us, afraid they'd take me to jail. She was still bruised, still scared from years of abuse. So we decided to bury him in the backyard. It was a new house then. We had just moved in a few months before in a different town. The house had a big backyard, much like this one. We picked a spot under an old oak tree just like yours, Martha. It seemed fitting, a place where no one would ever look. He paused, taking a shaky breath. "It took us hours. We dug all night. It was the hardest thing I've ever done." My mother wrapped him in an old canvas tarp we had in the garage. She put my locket inside with him. She said, "He won't be able to hurt anyone anymore. And this locket, it will remind you that you did this to protect me. You saved me, my son." It was a way to remember, to keep the secret buried, literally and figuratively. "After that night," David continued, "we moved away. We sold that house. My mother fabricated a story that my father had left us, abandoned us. Later, she spread the news that he had died in a tragic accident far away, just to stop any questions. We started a new life. She told me never to speak of it again to anyone. It was our secret, our terrible, painful secret. She didn't want me to live with the guilt. She said I was a hero. But I lived with the fear every single day, the fear that someone would find out." He looked at me, his eyes filled with raw emotion. "When I met you, Martha, you were everything good and pure. I loved you so much. I wanted to tell you, but how could I? How could I tell the woman I loved that I killed my father? I was so scared you would leave me, that you would hate me, so I kept the secret. And when we bought this house and I saw the big oak tree in the backyard, it felt like fate, or maybe a curse. I knew you loved gardening and I always worried you would dig too deep, too close to that spot. When my mother visited, he explained, we were talking about it. She was getting older, sicker. She asked if I ever thought about going back, moving the body, finding a better place to hide the truth. We talked about how heavy the secret was. She worried about me living with it. And then you started digging near the oak tree. I tried to stop you, Martha, I really did. I made excuses, I tried to dig in other parts of the garden, but your love for roses, it was stronger than my fear. He finally took his gaze off me and looked at Detective Miller. So yes, he said, his voice firm now though still full of pain. The skeleton in your canvas bag with my locket. That is my father, Robert Peterson, and I killed him 28 years ago to protect my mother from being murdered. The room was silent. I was sobbing openly, heartbroken for the little boy David once was, for the pain he had carried for so long. The detectives were quiet, processing this shocking confession. Detective Miller finally spoke. Mr. Peterson, she said, her voice surprisingly gentle, this is a very serious accusation you're making against yourself. We'll need to verify all of this. We'll need to speak to your mother. David nodded. She's ill, but she will tell you the truth. She remembers everything. I looked at David, my heart aching. My husband, my hero, had carried this burden alone for 28 years. He wasn't a monster. He was a survivor. He was a protector. And I had almost judged him so harshly. My anger evaporated, replaced by profound sadness and a fierce love. The detectives began to take David's official statement, asking for more details about the night, about his mother, about their life afterward. They confirmed they would be excavating the site and contacting his mother. David answered everything calmly, his voice clear and unwavering. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from him, even in this terrible moment. I sat there, watching him, my world turned upside down. My David, my simple, kind David, had lived a life of such deep, hidden tragedy. I wanted to reach out and hold him, to tell him it was okay, that I understood. But the police were still here, taking notes, making calls. This was far from over. I knew our lives would never be the same. The secret was out. The secret was out. A heavy, cold blanket seemed to fall over the small, cluttered room where David and I sat, flanked by the stern, quiet police officers. The air, usually warm with the scent of my simmering pot roast from earlier, now tasted metallic and stale, like old pennies and unspoken anxieties. The hum of the fluorescent lights above felt unnaturally loud, a low, persistent thrumming that vibrated through my bones, making my teeth ache. Even the faint, distant wail of a passing ambulance, a sound I rarely noticed, seemed to pierce the quiet, carrying with it a mournful, drawn-out echo that hung in the space long after the siren faded. The officers, 2 men and 1 woman, moved with a quiet efficiency that only amplified the gravity of the situation. Their pens scratched softly across notepads, making tiny, rhythmic whispers in the oppressive quiet. One officer, a tall man with tired eyes, spoke into his radio in hushed tones, his voice a low, indistinct murmur that was just loud enough to be a presence, but too soft to be understood, like a secret being kept from us even now. David sat next to me on the hard plastic chair, his shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. The vibrant blue of his simple, checkered shirt seemed duller now, faded by the stark reality that had just been laid bare. His hands, usually so busy and strong, rested limply on his knees, palms open, as if in surrender to the truth that had finally broken free. I could see the faint tremor in his fingers, a tiny, almost imperceptible shake that spoke volumes of the earthquake that had just torn through his carefully constructed world. My own breathing felt shallow and quick, catching in my throat like a trapped bird. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild, frantic drumbeat that I was sure everyone in the room could hear. I wanted to reach out, to take David's hand, to offer some comfort, but the invisible wall of police procedure stood between us, a silent barrier of forms and regulations. The click of a camera shutter as an officer documented something on the table felt like a gunshot in the still room, jarring and abrupt. The scent of ozone, perhaps from the camera flash or simply my own overactive senses, hung in the air, sharp and acrid. The silence wasn't empty, it was full. Full of unspoken questions, of dawning realizations, of a profound sadness that seemed to seep from David's very being and spread to every corner of the room. It was the kind of silence that pressed in on you, that made the air heavy and hard to breathe, a silence that tasted of tears unshed and years of hidden pain. This quiet, deep and consuming, stretched on for what felt like 100 long minutes, each second an eternity, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of paper, the soft clinking of keys on an officer's belt, or the distant, muffled sound of a car passing by outside, its tires whispering on the wet pavement. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a narrative of shock, regret, and the slow, inevitable creep of consequence. Finally, the lead detective, a woman with kind but firm eyes, closed her notepad with a soft thud. "Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller," she began, her voice calm but serious. "We have what we need for now. We'll be in touch. We understand this is a lot to process." She looked directly at David, her expression softening. "Mr. Miller, we want to assure you that this is not your fault. You were the victim of a terrible crime." David nodded slowly, not meeting her gaze. He looked utterly exhausted, as if the weight of the last 7 years, the secret, the fear, had finally been lifted, only to be replaced by the crushing burden of public exposure. His shoulders, which had always carried the quiet strength of a man who built things with his hands, now seemed bowed, diminished. I wanted to scream, to rail against the unfairness of it all, against the world that had made him feel he had to hide such an extraordinary accomplishment. Instead, I simply squeezed my hands together, my knuckles white, the rough fabric of my dress pressing against my skin. Leaving the police station felt like emerging from a long, suffocating tunnel into a world that was still the same, yet completely altered. The late afternoon sun, usually a comforting golden glow, now seemed too bright, too harsh, casting long, accusing shadows on the pavement. The air was cool, carrying the damp, earthy scent of recent rain and the distant, metallic tang of city exhaust. I pulled my thin cardigan tighter around me, but the chill that had settled deep in my bones had nothing to do with the weather. It was the cold shock of revelation, the icy grip of a truth that reshaped everything I thought I knew. We walked to our old, reliable sedan, its familiar blue paint dulled by years of sun and rain, but still a comforting sight. Each step David took seemed heavy, deliberate, as if he was wading through thick, invisible mud. His head remained down, his eyes fixed on his worn brown shoes, watching them navigate the cracked sidewalk. I noticed the way his usually steady gait faltered just a little, a subtle shift that spoke of a spirit wounded and weary. The crisp whisper of autumn leaves, already beginning to fall, crunched under our feet, a mournful sound that echoed the quiet sadness in my heart. The car door opened with a familiar clunk, and the scent of our usual car air freshener, a faint, sweet lavender, seemed almost foreign, too light for the heavy atmosphere we carried. I slid into the driver's seat, the old fabric cool against my legs, and David settled into the passenger side, folding his hands in his lap once more. The engine turned over with a comforting rumble, but the sound felt intrusive, loud against the deep silence that had taken root between us. I glanced at David, wanting to speak, to offer some words, any words, but none felt right. What do you say to a man who has just revealed 7 years of profound, hidden sorrow and astounding success, all tangled up together? The drive home was a blur of familiar streets rendered unfamiliar by the weight of our new reality. Houses we had passed 1,000 times, their porch lights beginning to flicker on in the gathering twilight, seemed to watch us with knowing eyes. The towering oak trees lining Elm Street, their leaves turning to brilliant shades of russet and gold, usually brought a smile to my face, a quiet appreciation for nature's beauty. But today, they just seemed like silent sentinels, standing guard over a world that felt suddenly full of secrets and shadows. The smooth hum of the tires on the asphalt was the only consistent sound, a low, hypnotic drone that filled the car but did nothing to break the deeper quiet between David and me. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles still white, my gaze fixed on the road ahead. The setting sun painted the sky in streaks of fiery orange and soft violet, a breathtaking display that normally would have made us pull over just to admire it. Tonight, it felt almost mocking in its beauty, a vibrant contrast to the dull ache in my chest. I stole another glance at David. He hadn't moved. His profile was etched against the deepening twilight, his jaw set, his eyes distant. I could almost hear the thoughts swirling in his mind, a torrent of memories and fears and a lifetime of being underestimated. David, I finally managed, my voice a little rough, surprising myself with how quiet it was. He stirred a slow, deliberate movement and turned his head slightly toward me. His eyes, usually so clear and kind, were clouded with a sadness I had never seen so intensely. "Me," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, carrying the texture of sandpaper. Are you okay?" The question felt foolish, inadequate. Of course, he wasn't okay. But it was all I could think to say, a desperate attempt to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. He sighed, a long, shaky breath that seemed to carry the weight of the entire world. "I don't know, me," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what happens now." His honesty, raw and vulnerable, struck a fresh wave of protective instinct in me. I reached over, my hand finding his on his knee, covering it gently. His skin was cool to the touch, and I felt the faint tremor return. "We'll figure it out, David," I promised, my voice firmer than I felt. "Together, we'll face whatever comes, just like we always have." I squeezed his hand, trying to transmit all the love and reassurance I felt through that simple touch. He didn't squeeze back, but his hand relaxed slightly under mine, a tiny sign that perhaps some of my words had reached him. The journey continued, silent once more, but this time, the silence felt different. It was no longer the heavy, oppressive quiet of the police station, but a more fragile, tender silence, filled with unspoken comfort and the unspoken promise of support. The streetlights began to click on, casting pools of warm, yellow light onto the pavement, chasing away some of the creeping darkness. When we finally pulled into our driveway, the old house stood waiting, its windows dark and quiet like a sleeping friend. The familiar scent of our honeysuckle bush, usually a sweet welcome, was faint tonight, lost amidst the other, sharper smells of regret and worry. Getting out of the car, I felt the crisp autumn air on my cheeks, a refreshing coolness that did little to clear the fog from my mind. The sound of David's footsteps behind me as we walked up the worn flagstone path to the front door was quiet, almost hesitant. I unlocked the door, the familiar click and whir of the mechanism, a tiny comfort in a world that felt upside down. Inside, the house was just as we had left it, steeped in the comforting scent of the cooling pot roast from earlier. Felt different. The soft glow of the table lamp, which I had left on, seemed weaker, unable to fully illuminate the new shadows that clung to every corner. Our worn armchair, usually so inviting, now looked like a silent witness to a life that was far more complicated than its simple comfort suggested. The ticking grandfather clock in the hall, a wedding gift from my grandmother, usually a soothing rhythm, now seemed to beat with a frantic urgency, counting down to an uncertain future. "David," I said, turning to him, "let's just sit for a bit. There's some pot roast left if you're hungry." My voice was gentle, careful. He shook his head slowly, his eyes still distant. "No, thank you, me, not hungry." He walked over to the armchair, moving slowly, deliberately, and sank into its familiar embrace. He leaned his head back, closing his eyes, a deep, weary sigh escaping his lips. His face, usually so open and kind, was etched with lines of profound exhaustion. I watched him, my heart aching with a tenderness so powerful it felt like a physical pain. I moved around the kitchen on autopilot, carefully putting away the untouched dinner, the clinking of plates a quiet counterpoint to the deep silence. I brewed us both a cup of chamomile tea, the gentle steam rising from the mugs, carrying the delicate, earthy scent of herbs. I brought him his mug, placing it carefully on the small side table next to him. He opened his eyes, a flicker of gratitude passing through them. "Thank you, me," he murmured, his voice still low, almost hollow. I sat opposite him on the sofa, pulling a knitted throw over my legs, the soft wool a small comfort. The only sound in the house was the gentle ticking of the clock and the faint, rhythmic whisper of David's breathing. He took a sip of his tea, the warmth of the mug seeming to bring a tiny bit of color back to his pale hands. "David," I began again, softly, "you don't have to talk tonight, but whenever you're ready, I want to understand. Everything, not just the money, but why you felt you had to keep it a secret. What happened?" My voice was filled with a gentle query, a deep longing to comprehend the layers of pain he had carried alone for so long. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and in his eyes I saw a profound weariness, a deep-seated hurt that stretched back further than 7 years, much further than the incredible success of his patent. He took another slow sip of tea, the aroma filling the quiet space between us. It's not just about the money, me, he started, his voice a little stronger now, though still fragile. It's about everything, about how I've always been seen, always underestimated, always the quiet one, the simple one, the one who could be overlooked, or worse, taken advantage of. His words hung in the air, heavy with years of unspoken grievances. I listened, my heart aching, my gaze fixed on his face, trying to absorb every nuance of his expression. He continued, his voice gaining a slow, steady momentum, as if finally releasing a dam of pent-up memories. It started early, me, even as a child. I was never the loudest, never the quickest with a joke. I liked to build things, to tinker, to read. My brother, Mark, was the charming one, the one who always had a crowd around him. My sister, Sarah, was the clever one, always excelling in school, getting all the praise. I was just David. He paused, a bitter, humorless chuckle escaping him. The good boy, the one who wouldn't cause trouble, the one whose opinions didn't matter as much. He shifted in the chair, a slight rustle of his clothes, and stared into the depths of his teacup. I remember when I was 8 years old. I spent weeks building this incredibly detailed model airplane using balsa wood and glue. I was so proud. It had tiny working propellers, and I'd even painted the markings on it exactly like the ones I saw in a book. I brought it to the dinner table, so excited to show my parents. His voice faltered, a raw edge entering it. My father barely glanced at it. He said, "That's nice, David. Now did you finish your chores?" My mother just said, "Oh, that's sweet, dear." Mark grabbed it, made airplane noises, and pretended to crash it, laughing. Sarah just rolled her eyes and said it was childish. Nobody saw the weeks of effort, the careful craftsmanship. They just saw a toy, a distraction. I felt invisible, like my passion, my work didn't matter. A deep furrow appeared between his brows as he recalled the memory, a ghost of that old hurt resurfacing. That was just one small thing, of course, but there were so many. At family gatherings, if I tried to talk about something I was interested in, like how an engine worked, or a new idea for a garden tool, my words would just drift away. Someone would interrupt, change the subject, or dismiss it with a wave of their hand. "Oh, David and his gadgets," they'd say, with a laugh that wasn't kind. It stung me, it always stung. You feel like your thoughts, your very voice, has no weight, no importance. He took a long, slow breath, his chest rising and falling visibly. And when I started making a bit of money with my inventions before the big patent, things got worse in a different way. Suddenly, I wasn't just simple David, I was David with a few extra dollars. But not David, the smart inventor. No, never that. A bitter smile touched his lips, quickly vanishing. It was always, "David, can you lend me $100 for rent?" Or, "David, my car needs a new part, can you help me out with $500? I always did me. I couldn't say no, I wanted to help, I wanted to be useful, but the money was never returned, not once. And if I ever gently asked about it, I'd get laughed at. "Oh, come on, David, you're doing so well, what's $100 to you?" they'd say. My own generosity was seen as weakness, an endless well they could draw from without consequence. My kindness was mistaken for gullibility. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze still fixed on the floor, as if seeing a parade of these past indignities. I remember one Christmas about 10 years ago, I'd bought my sister Sarah a really thoughtful gift. It was a vintage sewing machine, one she'd mentioned wanting years ago. I spent weeks searching for the right one, had it restored. It cost me $800, which was a lot for me back then. She opened it and her face fell. "Oh," she said, "a sewing machine, I suppose it's nice." Then she looked at Mark's new video game console, which he'd been showing off. "Too bad it's not a new TV like Mark got," she muttered, loud enough for me to hear. Not a thank you, just disappointment that my thoughtful, expensive gift wasn't something else. Something better. That Christmas, I felt a deep, cold ache in my chest. It felt like I could never do enough, or give enough, or be enough for my efforts to be truly seen or appreciated. He paused, a flicker of pain in his eyes. And my quiet nature, it was always misinterpreted. If I was silent in a conversation, it wasn't because I was thinking or listening deeply. It was because I had nothing to say or I was being sullen. One time at a family dinner, my cousin, Tom, joked, "David's so quiet, you could hide a herd of elephants in his brain and nobody would ever know." Everyone laughed. My Aunt Carol piped up, "Oh, don't mind David, he's just always been a bit slow on the uptake." It felt like a punch to the gut, me. Not just the joke, but the way they all agreed, the way my own family seemed to confirm that I was somehow less intelligent, less capable. It made me retreat further into myself. It made me believe that anything I thought or did that was outside their expectation of simple David would be met with scorn or disbelief. His voice grew heavier, tinged with a deep weariness. So when the patent hit when the first payment came in, it was massive, far more than I ever imagined. The first payment alone was $2 million. Then there were the royalties coming in every 3 months. It was astounding. But the very first thought I had wasn't joy or excitement, it was fear. A cold, stark fear. Fear of what would happen if my family, if anyone, knew. I knew with absolute certainty what they would do. They wouldn't celebrate my achievement. They wouldn't be proud. They would see me, not as David, the inventor, but as David, the walking ATM, the one they could finally exploit without limits, the one whose wealth they could use to fix all their problems without ever having to face their own responsibilities. He looked at me, his eyes wide and earnest, pleading for understanding. I imagined it, I played it out in my head 1,000 times. Mark would want money for his business ventures, which always failed. Sarah would suddenly remember all the times she helped me and demand repayment with interest. My parents would start talking about their retirement fund and how I could contribute. The requests, the demands, the unspoken accusations, the guilt trips, they would never stop. My life wouldn't be my own. My quiet, peaceful life, the one I had built with you, would be shattered by an endless parade of hands reaching out, not in congratulations but in expectation. And if I said no, if I tried to assert myself, they would turn on me. They would say I was selfish, that I had changed, that I had forgotten where I came from, that I was too good for them now. I knew the accusations would be far worse than anything they had ever said before. His hands, still resting on his knees, clenched slowly into fists, then relaxed again, a small, involuntary gesture of the turmoil within him. I just wanted to be safe. I wanted to protect the life we had, the quiet contentment, the peace. I didn't want my success to destroy it. I truly believed that hiding it was the only way to keep myself, and us, safe from their demands and their judgments. The silence, the secrecy, became a shield, a wall against what I truly believed would be their boundless greed and deep-seated contempt. The room was filled with the heavy echo of his words, each one a stark brushstroke painting a picture of profound emotional neglect and casual cruelty. I could feel a slow, simmering anger beginning to boil within me. Not at David, never at David, but at his family, at the people who were supposed to love and support him, but who instead had chipped away at his spirit piece by painful piece, leaving him feeling worthless and unappreciated. My love for him deepened in that moment, expanding to encompass this newly revealed landscape of his pain, a landscape I now vowed to protect. "Oh, David," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion, tears stinging my eyes. "My poor, sweet David." I reached across the small space between us, taking both of his hands in mine, holding them tight. His skin felt warm now, no longer cold and trembling. "You've carried all this, all these years, completely alone, all that pain, all that fear." My thumb stroked the back of his hand, a small, comforting gesture. "It wasn't right, David. It was never right. You deserved so much more than that. You deserve to be celebrated, to be seen, to be cherished for the brilliant, kind man you are." He looked up at me, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and for the first time since the revelation, a fragile smile, a mere ghost of his usual warmth, touched his lips. "I know me," he said, his voice stronger now, filled with a newfound, fragile relief. "But I have you. You always saw me. You always made me feel like I mattered." His words pierced my heart, a bittersweet testament to our connection. I squeezed his hands again, my resolve hardening. This secret, this burden, had been lifted from his shoulders, but its repercussions were just beginning. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I would stand by him, a fierce protector against any storm that came. No one, absolutely no one, would ever make my David feel small or invisible again. This was a turning point, a new chapter. And I would make sure it was one where David's true worth, his quiet brilliance, and his incredible kindness were finally, openly, and unequivocally celebrated. I envisioned the path ahead, knowing it wouldn't be easy. There would be questions, judgments, perhaps even anger from those who felt wronged by his secrecy. The world, and certainly his family, would have a lot to say. But armed with the full truth, and with the unwavering strength of our shared love, I felt ready. The journey had been long and filled with unexpected twists and turns, but the destination, a place of truth and healing, was finally within reach. The scent of chamomile tea still lingered in the air, a soothing presence, but beneath it, I could now detect a faint, new scent, the sharp, clean scent of a future that, while uncertain, held the promise of honesty and strength. If you found yourself touched by David's story, please remember to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to Aunt Me's Fireside Stories for more tales of resilience, love, and the enduring power of the human spirit. But David's journey, my dear friends, was truly far from its final chapter, for even in the golden autumn of one's life, new storms can gather on the horizon, testing the very foundations of the peace so carefully built. David, as we know, had faced down immense challenges, demonstrating a resilience that inspired us all. He had found a quiet rhythm in his later years, a soothing cadence to the days that hummed with a gentle, fulfilling purpose. He lived in a small, two-bedroom cottage, nestled among old oak trees, its pale blue paint peeling just a little around the edges, giving it a friendly, lived-in look that spoke of countless sunrises and quiet evenings. A fragrant climbing rose, heavy with blush pink blooms, cascaded over the front porch, its petals releasing a sweet, delicate perfume into the morning air. He had a small workshop out back, a sturdy little structure smelling perpetually of pine sawdust, and the faint, nostalgic scent of old motor oil, where he mended broken things with meticulous care. Antique rocking chairs, grandfather clocks whose intricate mechanisms had stalled decades ago, sometimes even forgotten dolls or toy trains that children from the village brought to him, their young eyes wide with hopeful anticipation. His hands, though gnarled with 65 years of honest, unceasing work, still moved with a gentle precision, coaxing life back into discarded objects. Every morning, David would rise promptly at 5:30 a.m., even before the first tentative rays of sunlight pierced the eastern sky. He'd brew a pot of strong, dark coffee, its rich aroma filling the tiny kitchen, and then he'd settle into his favorite armchair by the window. There he would watch, day after day, as the sun slowly crept over the distant hills, painting the sky with an ever-changing palette of soft hues, tender oranges, fiery pinks, and deep, luminous purples. This quiet ritual, these simple, unassuming joys, were his cherished reward after decades of struggle and sacrifice. He deeply cherished the tranquility, the slow, predictable rhythm of his days. He truly believed he had earned this peace, having poured his entire heart and soul into raising his two beloved children, Michael and Sarah, especially after their dear mother had passed away 20 years ago. He remembered with a pang of bittersweet nostalgia how he had sacrificed so much, tirelessly working 2 jobs for 15 arduous years, sometimes cleaning offices until 2:00 a.m. just to ensure they could both attend college. He wanted them to have opportunities, a life of ease and intellectual stimulation that he himself had never known. He remembered the overwhelming surge of pride that swelled in his chest on their respective graduation days. Michael, bright-eyed and ambitious, from engineering at 22, and Sarah, sharp and determined, from law at 23, both with bright, promising futures stretching before them like sunlit paths leading to boundless horizons. He had given them everything he possibly could, not just his unwavering love and his precious time, but sometimes even his very last $100 saved for a new winter coat, just so they wouldn't go without. Now, Michael was 37, a highly successful architect living in a sleek, modern apartment complex downtown, easily earning a hefty $150,000 a year, his name often appearing in glossy architecture magazines. Sarah, now 38, was an equally sharp and formidable lawyer, a partner in a prestigious firm in the bustling city, her income easily matching Michael's, perhaps even exceeding it. They had, to all outward appearances, achieved precisely what David had dreamed for them: lives of comfort, professional respect, and material security. Yet, somewhere along their impressive ascent, something vital had subtly shifted, like a majestic ship slowly and imperceptibly drifting off course in what appeared to be a calm and quiet sea. The first whispers of this disconcerting change were subtle, almost imperceptible to David's loving, but perhaps too trusting heart, like the faint, dry rustle of leaves high in the oak trees before a truly strong wind begins to blow. It started innocently enough, with increasingly missed phone calls, then with more and more frequently canceled Sunday dinners, once a sacred family tradition. "Too busy, Dad," Michael would often say, his voice always rushed, even over the phone, the words delivered with a polite but unmistakable distant tone that chilled David more than he let on. Sarah would simply send a curt text message, "Can't make it. Big case," leaving no room for discussion or heartfelt apologies. David, always trying to be understanding of their demanding, high-pressure careers, initially brushed it off, telling himself, "They're just caught up in their important lives, that's all." He'd patiently wait by the old wooden window on Sunday afternoons, his gaze drifting to the empty, gravel driveway, a small, persistent ache beginning to bloom in his chest, a feeling he quickly tried to ignore and push deep down. He'd rationalize, "They're just busy. They'll definitely come next time, I know they will." Then came the incidents, small at first, like tiny, insignificant stones thrown into a previously calm pond, each creating ripples that spread wider and wider, disturbing the placid surface. The first truly clear, undeniable instance of overt disrespect happened just 3 years ago, shortly after David had celebrated his 62nd birthday with a quiet cake and a few close friends. Michael had called, not, as David had hoped, to check in on his well-being or to simply chat, but specifically to ask for David's old pickup truck, the one David had lovingly maintained, polished, and cherished for over 30 years. "Dad, I need a utility vehicle for a few weeks while my new SUV is in the shop for minor repairs," Michael stated, his words a demand, not a request, his tone flat, devoid of any hint of negotiation or even a polite please. He added casually, "My new model car is a brand new Mercedes. It's a waste to haul lumber or construction materials in it. Your old rust bucket would be absolutely perfect for the job." David's heart gave a strange, painful little lurch, a sensation akin to an unexpected stumble. "Rust bucket," he repeated softly, his voice barely a whisper, as he looked out at his beloved truck, its deep, honest blue paint still shining proudly under the warm afternoon sun, a testament to his diligent weekly waxing and polishing. He had so many irreplaceable memories tied to that truck. Hauling Michael's first bicycle home, driving Sarah, nervously excited, to her first school dance, taking them both fishing on countless joyous weekends by the lake. It was much more than a mere vehicle. It was a silent, steadfast witness to their entire lives, a repository of shared laughter and quiet moments. "Yeah, Dad, it's pretty ancient," Michael continued, completely missing the subtle nuance and underlying hurt in David's voice, his tone betraying no empathy whatsoever. "It's perfectly fine for you puttering around the village, doing your little errands, but for hauling heavy construction stuff, it's just a beast of burden. It saves my Mercedes from getting scratched and dented, you understand." David felt a sharp, cutting pang, a sensation like a cold, smooth stone dropping abruptly into the pit of his stomach. He deeply loved his truck, but even more profoundly, he loved Michael. He wanted, desperately, to help his son. "Of course, son," David managed to say, his voice a little hoarse, betraying the turmoil within him. "When exactly do you need it?" "Tomorrow morning." "I'll send my assistant to pick it up at 8:00 a.m. sharp," Michael replied, already clearly wrapping up the brief call, his mind already on other, more pressing matters. "Thanks, Dad, you're a lifesaver as always." And with that abrupt pronouncement, he hung up. No offer to visit, no polite conversation about David's day, just a swift, cold transaction. David stood by the old rotary phone for a long, quiet moment, the persistent dial tone buzzing faintly in his ear, an echoing, hollow sound in the suddenly quiet kitchen. The morning air, usually so fresh and sweet with the scent of pine and morning dew, suddenly felt heavy, thick with an invisible, unspoken tension. He slowly walked out to the truck, his hand instinctively running over its cool, smooth metal surface, feeling a strange, disorienting mix of sadness, bewilderment, and a nascent resentment he didn't want to acknowledge. He had always meticulously taught his children respect, especially for things that served a purpose, things that had a history, things that were built to last. He had taught them to appreciate hard work, to understand value beyond monetary cost, not to dismiss something simply because it was old or unfashionable. Had his lessons truly been forgotten, or had they just never sunk in deeply enough to penetrate their ambitious, modern sensibilities? The next incident, perhaps even more cutting and painful, came during their annual Christmas dinner 2 years ago. David had spent 3 full days meticulously preparing for it, his hands busy, his heart full of anticipation. The small cottage, usually a bastion of quiet contemplation, was filled with the rich, warm, intoxicating aromas of roast turkey, savory sage stuffing, and the sweet, comforting scent of his famous apple pie, a recipe lovingly handed down from his own dear mother. He had polished the old, tarnished silverware until it gleamed, ironed the crisp linen tablecloth until it was perfectly smooth, and artfully arranged fresh, vibrant holly and fragrant pine cones on the mantelpiece. He wanted everything to be absolutely perfect, an inviting haven for his children and their spouses. Michael brought his wife, Eleanor, a perpetually elegant woman who smelled of expensive, subtle perfume and wore a polite but noticeably detached smile. Sarah arrived with her husband, Robert, a quiet, almost shy man who always seemed profoundly uncomfortable in any social setting, his eyes darting nervously around the room. As they finally sat around the old, sturdy oak dining table, the flickering candlelight casting soft, dancing shadows on their faces, David, ever the gracious host, tried his best to initiate genuine conversation. "Michael, how's that new project coming along?" "The one with the waterfront properties and the tricky environmental regulations?" he asked, genuinely interested, remembering Michael's enthusiastic description of it weeks ago. Michael took a slow, deliberate sip of his wine, a delicate Merlot he had brought himself, and gave a dismissive, almost condescending wave of his hand. "Oh, that old thing, it's fine, Dad. Nothing you'd really understand, honestly. It's all about complex zoning laws and multi-million-dollar investments, high finance and corporate jargon, far too complex for simple folk like yourself." He chuckled softly, a small, patronizing sound that grated on David's nerves, and glanced at Eleanor, who offered a tight-lipped, practiced smile. David felt the natural smile freeze on his own face, a cold mask replacing his warmth. Simple folk. The words hung in the warm, inviting air, heavy and unwelcome, like an uninvited, boorish guest who refused to leave. He had built a successful, albeit small, carpentry business from the ground up for 40 years. He had understood intricate contracts, navigated complex material sourcing, managed a team of people, and balanced finances, all while raising 2 children alone. He had built his entire life, brick by laborious brick, from absolute scratch. Was that simple? His mind, in a flash of painful memory, darted back to the countless evenings he had spent poring over his children's intimidating school textbooks, painstakingly helping them with their difficult math problems and complex history essays, always telling them to strive for knowledge, to never stop learning, to always understand the world around them. Had all that effort, all that sacrifice, culminated in him being dismissively deemed simple? The rich, comforting scent of the roast turkey suddenly lost its appeal, turning flat and uninviting. He tried to swallow, but his throat felt tight and constricted, as if a large, unyielding lump had formed there, making speech difficult. Sarah then chimed in, her voice pitched slightly higher. "Honestly, Dad, you should just fully embrace retirement. Stop tinkering around in that dusty old workshop. It's not doing you any favors. It's not like you need the money. We're perfectly capable of supporting you if you need anything." Her tone was a strange, unsettling blend of feigned concern and thinly veiled condescension, as if his profound passion for mending and creating things was merely a childish, embarrassing hobby she was forced to tolerate. "But I genuinely enjoy it, Sarah," David said, his voice softer than he intended, almost a whisper, as if he were pleading. "It keeps me busy, keeps my mind sharp. I genuinely like fixing things, and people in the village rely on me, I help them." "Oh, Dad, really?" Sarah sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes ever so slightly, a gesture David hadn't missed. "It's just a hobby, not a career. You're a senior now. You should be traveling the world, playing golf in the sun, living a little. Like normal retired people. Not getting your hands dirty with old junk." The word junk landed squarely on David's aching heart, a direct, deliberate hit. His beloved workshop, his sanctuary, filled with the comforting, honest scent of pine and seasoned wood, where he painstakingly brought broken things back to vibrant life, was old junk. The small, meticulously crafted wooden birdhouse he had lovingly carved for his grandchild, the one that sat proudly on the porch swing, had started its journey of creation in that very junk pile. His hands, calloused and strong, imbued with the history of creation and repair, were suddenly invisible to them, their long history of skilled craftsmanship and tireless effort completely overlooked, unappreciated. He looked down at his plate, the perfectly roasted turkey, once so inviting, suddenly looking like a dry, unappetizing lump of meat. The genuine joy, the warmth of the season, had completely drained from the room, replaced by a cold, invisible current that ran subtly beneath the surface of the polite smiles and forced, empty chatter. He managed to finish the meal, but the taste of everything was bland, like fine sawdust or ashes in his mouth. After they finally left, the cottage, usually still filled with the comforting echoes of laughter and conversation after a family gathering, felt exceptionally hollow and vast. The silence that fell upon the small house that evening was not the peaceful, comforting quiet David usually cherished. No, this was a heavy, suffocating blanket of emptiness, woven tightly with unspoken words and deeply bruised feelings. Each deliberate tick of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to boom in the profound stillness, marking not just the relentless passing of minutes, but the slow, agonizing erosion of a once strong connection. The lingering, rich scent of pine cleaner and roast turkey clung stubbornly to the air, a cruel, mocking reminder of the feast and the fractured conversations it had hosted. David walked slowly, almost as if in a trance, through the dining room, his tired footsteps muffled by the worn, floral rug, feeling each creak of the old floorboards as a sigh from the old house itself, echoing his own weariness. He absently picked up a fallen piece of bright red holly. Its sharp, spiky points a stark contrast to the softness of the smooth green leaves. He stared blankly at the flickering embers in the fireplace, their meager warmth utterly unable to reach the deep, penetrating chill that had settled deep within his bones. The usual comforting hum of the refrigerator, the distant, familiar bark of a neighbor's dog, even the faint, melancholic whisper of the wind against the window panes, all these everyday, grounding sounds were absorbed and muted by the profound, crushing weight of his solitude. He moved slowly to the window, gazing out into the inky blackness of the night, where only the faintest, most resilient stars dared to pierce the overwhelming gloom. The world outside seemed to hold its breath, mirroring the absolute stillness inside him. His throat ached, a persistent, raw, physical manifestation of the unshed tears that pressed behind his weary eyes. He wished desperately for the sounds of children's laughter, for the boisterous, lively arguments that once filled these very rooms, anything at all to break the suffocating silence that felt like a living, breathing thing, slowly squeezing the very air from his lungs. It was a silence born not of peace, but of profound absence, a testament to the ever-widening, growing distance between himself and the very people he had poured his entire life, his entire being, into nurturing. He longed for the simpler, happier days when their vibrant presence filled the space with energetic life, when their small, trusting hands reached instinctively for his, when their innocent eyes sparkled with unadulterated adoration. Now, only the hollow echoes of their dismissive words remained, resounding mercilessly in the oppressive quiet, making his heart feel like a hollow, neglected drum. Over the next 18 months, these painful incidents tragically escalated, becoming more frequent, more blatant, more deeply cutting, like a festering wound that stubbornly refused to heal, growing steadily worse with each passing day. Michael often called David only when he specifically needed something, not just the old truck, but sometimes advice on a particularly difficult client, always, infuriatingly, followed by, "But what would you genuinely know about high-stakes negotiations and corporate maneuvering, Dad?" Or to explicitly ask David to fix a broken piece of expensive antique furniture from his lavish downtown apartment, always insisting, "Don't bother bringing it here, Dad, it's just a little drive for you," despite David's advancing age and the 45-minute, one-way journey. David, ever the loving, dutiful father, would dutifully make the tiring trip, carefully carrying the heavy, often cumbersome items back to his workshop, then painstakingly mending them, imagining the renewed joy they would bring to Michael's stylish home. But when he delivered them, Michael would often be preoccupied, deeply immersed in his laptop or phone, giving only a quick, almost imperceptible nod of thanks before immediately returning to his screen. Sometimes Michael would casually offer a crumpled $20 bill, "For your trouble, Dad," as if David were merely a hired handyman, a stranger performing a paid service, not his own flesh and blood, his father who worked for pure, selfless love. David would gently but firmly push the money back, his hand trembling slightly, his voice soft but resolute, saying, "No, son, it's truly my pleasure always." These transactions, these cold, impersonal exchanges, chipped away relentlessly at David's spirit, leaving him feeling less and less like a revered father and more like a mere service provider, a convenience. Sarah's disrespect, in contrast, took a different, more insidious, deeply personal form. She would visit less and less, perhaps only once every 3 months, and when she did, her infrequent visits felt less like loving family gatherings and more like critical inspections. She would stride through David's modest, comfortable home, her eyes meticulously scanning his cherished antique furniture, his beloved collection of well-worn old books, his faded but wonderfully comfortable armchair. "Dad, this place is so quaint," she'd often remark, the word carefully chosen, but laced unmistakably with pity and a distinct hint of disdain. "Have you honestly thought about modernizing, getting rid of some of this endless clutter? It's not really presentable, is it, to your professional friends?" She would gesture vaguely, dismissively, at his framed photographs of cherished family history, his overflowing shelves filled with lovingly collected mementos. One particularly galling afternoon, about 8 months ago, Sarah had stopped by David's cottage completely unannounced. David was deep in his workshop, meticulously sanding down an antique rocking horse, its wooden surface smooth beneath his experienced hand, preparing it for a neighbor's grandchild. The comforting scent of cedar filled the air, mingling pleasantly with the sweet, clean smell of beeswax polish. He heard her high heels clacking sharply on the rough stone path, a sound so jarringly different from the soft, earthy crunch of his own worn boots. "Dad, are you in this dusty old cave again?" Her voice, though not shouting, carried a sharp, dismissive edge, cutting cleanly through the peaceful hum of his sanding machine. David emerged, wiping sawdust from his brow with the back of his hand, a warm, welcoming smile on his face. "Sarah, what a wonderful surprise. Come in, dear, don't just stand there." She paused dramatically at the threshold, wrinkling her nose delicately. Dad, it genuinely smells like a lumber yard in here. And what exactly are you doing with that thing?" She pointed with a perfectly manicured, crimson-tipped finger at the half-restored rocking horse, its painted, innocent eyes seeming to look back at her with a silent, desperate plea for understanding. "It's a rocking horse, love, for little Lily next door. It was her grandmother's, a cherished heirloom," David explained, his smile faltering slightly, his voice softer now. "It just needed a little love, a new coat of paint, and a bit of a polish to bring it back to life." Sarah let out a small, scoffing laugh, a sound that pierced David's heart. "Dad, for goodness sake, you could easily buy her a brand new one for just $50 at the local toy store. Why in the world would you waste your precious time on this old relic? It's hardly worth the effort, truly. People just throw these kinds of things away now. They have no sentimental value anymore." She walked further into the workshop, her critical gaze sweeping disdainfully over his carefully organized tools, his neatly kept workbench. She picked up a small, exquisitely hand-carved wooden bird, one David had lovingly made for his own mother many years ago, and examined it with a cold, critical eye. "Honestly, Dad, you should just seriously consider selling this place and moving into a nice, modern retirement community. They have so many activities, pristine clean facilities, absolutely no sawdust. You could play bingo and watch television all day. Robert and I could easily pay for it, of course. We just worry about you out here all alone, surrounded by all this." Her sweeping, dismissive gesture encompassed his entire life's passion, his beloved home, his most cherished memories. David felt a profound, bone-deep weariness settle over him, heavy as a plummeting stone. His hands, usually so steady and capable, trembled slightly as he slowly put down the sanding block. The rocking horse, once a comforting symbol of loving restoration and hope, suddenly felt like an unbearably heavy burden in his hands. He looked at his daughter, her face a mask of what she genuinely perceived as loving concern, but what felt to him like utter, cutting disdain. He saw no outright malice, only a deep-seated lack of understanding, an unbridgeable chasm between their worlds that seemed to widen irrevocably with every dismissive, thoughtless word. He vividly remembered holding Sarah as a tiny baby, her incredibly small hand clutching his finger with surprising strength, her innocent eyes filled with boundless, pure trust. He had taught her painstakingly to respect the work of hands, to value what was old and had a story to tell, to see the beauty in imperfection. Where had all of that invaluable teaching gone? His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely audible, thick with unshed emotion. "Sarah, this isn't just a place. It's my home, it's my sanctuary. These aren't just things, they're memories, they're stories, they're echoes of the past. And this," he gestured weakly to the workshop, his voice a little stronger now, "this is where I find my purpose. It's not about money, it's about worth, about value that can't be bought. It's about bringing joy, about keeping things alive, keeping history breathing." Sarah merely shrugged, a dismissive flick of her shoulder, her attention already elsewhere. "Well, if you absolutely insist on living like a hermit among your broken treasures, Dad. Just don't come crying to us when you accidentally glue your hand to a table or something equally silly." She gave a forced, unnatural laugh, then checked her expensive designer watch with an air of practiced nonchalance. "Right, I really must run. Big meeting. Just thought I'd pop in for a moment. Think about what I said about the retirement home, okay?" And with another hurried air kiss, she was gone, her expensive car kicking up a cloud of dust as she sped away, leaving David standing alone amidst the comforting scent of cedar and the silent, almost reproachful gaze of the half-restored rocking horse. The silence that followed was profoundly different from the one after the painful Christmas dinner. This wasn't just absence. It was the echoing void of an argument that never happened, of deeply hurt feelings that were never acknowledged, never addressed. It was the quiet, steady drip of profound disappointment, slowly but surely filling a bucket in his heart, threatening to overflow. David felt a peculiar, unsettling detachment, as if he were watching his own life unfold from a distant, dispassionate vantage point, seeing the disrespect bloom all around him, but feeling utterly powerless to stop its relentless growth. He remembered, with a chilling clarity, the old fable of the frog in slowly boiling water, gradually warming up to its inevitable demise, unaware of the danger until it was too late. Was he that frog? Had he become so utterly accustomed to their dismissive words, their condescending tones, that he was slowly but surely losing his own precious sense of self-worth, his very identity? He thought back to his own youth, to simpler times, when his own father, a hardworking, honorable farmer, had taught him the invaluable lesson of dignity, of always holding your head high, no matter your station in life, no matter the struggles. He remembered the fierce pride that shone in his father's eyes when David, at just 16 years old, had managed to painstakingly fix their broken tractor all by himself, saving them hundreds of dollars they simply didn't have. That feeling of self-reliance, of competence, of contributing something meaningful, had been a bedrock, a cornerstone of David's entire identity. Now, his children, with their fancy degrees and their impressive high salaries, treated him like a doddering old fool, a quaint, irrelevant relic from a bygone era, someone to be barely tolerated, passively managed, and eventually conveniently put away and forgot. The erosion of his spirit was almost complete. He found himself increasingly hesitating to share news, to express his opinions, to offer his wisdom. He'd simply nod, offer a quiet, non-committal "him," and slowly retreat deeper into his own thoughts whenever Michael or Sarah began their incessant monologues about their important lives, their complex problems, which always, implicitly, seemed to suggest that his own simple life was without consequence, without value, without any real meaning. He started to feel utterly invisible, a ghost haunting his own home, a fading memory in his own life story. The vibrant man who had overcome so much, who had built a life filled with resilience and enduring love, was slowly but surely fading under the relentless barrage of casual, thoughtless disrespect. One particularly poignant evening, David was sitting alone on his old porch swing, the wood groaning softly under his weight, watching the ethereal dance of fireflies blinking their tiny lights in the deepening twilight. He had spent the entire day finishing Lily's rocking horse, meticulously painting tiny, perfect red apples on its bridle, a labor of pure love. He felt a quiet, deep satisfaction in a job well done. He thought for a fleeting moment about calling Sarah to tell her it was finally finished, to share his simple joy, but then he immediately imagined her inevitable response. "Oh, that old thing, are you still wasting your time on that?" He sighed, a heavy, weary sound, the profound sadness of it lost in the vast, enveloping expanse of the evening air. He realized then, with a chilling clarity that cut through the twilight peace like a sharp blade, that he simply couldn't go on living like this. This wasn't just about his feelings being hurt. This was about his very identity, his fundamental dignity, being slowly but surely chipped away, piece by painful, agonizing piece. His spirit, the enduring human spirit that Aunt Mee often spoke of with such reverence, was being tested not by overt cruelty or grand tragedies, but by the insidious, constant drip of dismissiveness from the very people he loved most fiercely in the entire world. He had given them everything he had, only to be given back a hollow, disingenuous imitation of respect. He had sacrificed his own dreams, his own aspirations, for the sake of theirs, and now his own dreams, his deepest passions, were being openly ridiculed and scorned. He knew, deep in his aching, weary heart, that he had to do something. Not for revenge, not out of anger or bitterness, but purely for self-preservation, for the sacred sake of the man he still knew himself to be, the man he had fought so hard to become. He had faced down abject poverty, the crushing weight of grief, and the profound loneliness of a life lived largely alone. He had built a life, a family, a legacy, however modest. He could not, would not, allow himself to be diminished, to become a fading shadow in his own story, a footnote in the lives of others. The night deepened around him, and the crickets began their nightly symphony, a rhythmic, insistent chorus that seemed to whisper through the stillness. "Speak up, stand tall, reclaim your story." The porch swing continued its gentle, rhythmic creak, a quiet, steadfast testament to a man standing on the precipice of a profound realization, ready, finally, to defend the sacred ground of his own self-worth. It was 9:15 p.m. on a warm, humid Aug 12, 2023 evening, when David made a silent, unshakable promise to himself. He would not be erased. He would find his voice again, not with anger or resentment, but with the quiet, formidable strength that had carried him through so many storms before. This was not, by any means, the end of David's story, but rather, the quiet, resolute turning of a page, signaling the beginning of a brave new chapter of quiet reclamation and profound self-assertion.